Pardon me. There being no observations, the order of business is hereby approved. Approved. Esteemed colleagues, we shall now proceed to the second item on the order of business. In this regard, and in accordance with the request of the delegations of Antigua and Barbuda, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, Peru, the United States, and Uruguay, as contained in document CP/INF 9431/22, Addendum 1, we will now proceed to the presentations by the distinguished speakers, beginning with a presentation by Commissioner Julissa Mantilla Falcon, President of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Commissioner Mantilla, welcome back to the OAS Permanent Council. You have the floor.
Is the commissioner connected?
Commissioner is not connected. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to Mr. John Michael Simon, President of the Group of Human Rights Experts on Nicaragua. Mr. Simon, welcome to the OAS Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Buenas tardes, ¿me escuchan?
Sí.
Very good afternoon. I hope I can be heard. Thank you. Allow me to express my thanks to the Council on behalf of my colleagues for this kind invitation to be a part of this special session of the Permanent Council of the OAS, which offers the opportunity for us to review the mandate that we adopted at the Council of the United Nations with regard to the situation in Nicaragua. The resolution that we have been bestowed through that mandate goes to the end of March past, and those who have presented that draft resolution are, among others, 3 co-sponsors as well of Resolution 49.3 of the Council of Human Rights, and these have been Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, and Peru, besides the first 2 who signed. So we have here a very weighty draft resolution here, which brings us together and is the predicate on which we meet here. Who are we, you may ask? Well, we are one of the then very active human rights experts. There are 13 at the time, of which 10 are independent. 3 operate under the aegis of the Office of the High Commission on Human Rights. And what I would say is that this is, in fact, a 3rd-generation mandate as regards the UN Human Rights Council, with a view to ascertain facts, elements that may serve to establish the responsibility of those who have violated the human rights of others. And what we place ourselves in is not only the global, the worldwide human rights context, but of course the hemispheric one. But there is either way a very firm basis on which these violations can be properly called human rights violations. The mandate, in effect, is triangular, if I may put it that way. On the one hand, it urges to the investigation and determination of facts. It's a fact-finding purpose. Then, at this third generation level, the idea is to offer support in third party countries, such that these may extend their jurisdiction to cover such human rights violations in their own territory. Then the third of this triangular structure I'm describing goes to the solution, the improvement, as it were, the relief to be given, the violations of human rights in Nicaragua itself. And of course, the Commissioner will be speaking at length on that, and we also have a Resolution 2.9. We have that resolution that the UN Human Rights Council has given us, which is very much rooted in an ongoing monitoring, an ongoing tracking of what's occurring in Nicaragua. How are things evolving or not? And the idea, of course, is that we work in tandem with other elements, with other agents who are interested in joining forces, as we are, collaborating with the OAS and indeed with the full Inter-American system. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to share this background.
Presentation. I see that Commissioner Mantilla is now connected. Commissioner Mantilla, welcome back to the OAS Permanent Council. You have the floor.
I thank you. Madam Ambassador, Luann Galen Gilchrist, Secretary General Luis Almagro, Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, permanent representatives, alternates, representatives of member countries, observers, members of the group of experts in Nicaragua from the UN. A very good afternoon to all. In my capacity as President of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, I'm very grateful to this Permanent Council for this opportunity to share our sense of the gravity of the situation in Nicaragua. And let me share also the greetings of our rapporteur for Nicaragua, Esmeralda Arosemena, also of the IACHR. The very serious situation is about 180 plus prisoners who remain detained for human rights presumed violations, and they have been completely ignored despite precautionary measures and numbers of other measures that we have taken that have been ignored. It is documented that the families of the persons that are detained are continually harassed and punished by the police. They are in very poor health. The deep prison El Chipote is the place where they are held. They are barred from seeing their family, even a photograph of their children. They are kept in isolation, and women like Ana Maria Telles, Mara Davila, and a number of other female leaders are, for their part, completely isolated in conditions that could be rightly termed cruel and inhuman treatment. One of them has been today on 50 days of hunger strike, demanding that he have a chance to see his family. The ICHR equally demands the Nicaraguan state, demands that he be freed. The political and human rights tragedy that has befallen Nicaragua from April of 2018 is going literally from bad to worse. The complete violation of separation of powers and the total absence of anything that could approximate the rule of law is such that the entire state apparatus is devoted to repressing civil society, the church, the press, or any other group that might dare speak against the regime. Just a few weeks ago, there was an intensification of the measures taken by Nicaragua to completely close down the civil space of the country. Any type of fundamental freedom of the population has simply disappeared. Freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of association, academic freedom, freedom of speech, naturally. They're gone, gone, gone. Particularly so in the first months of this year, with tremendous intensity and great concern, the Commission has watched where more than 1,000 civil society organizations have simply been wiped away, including political parties that are against the government and human rights defendants, but that's not all. International cooperation for development, universities, academe, medical associations, human and social groups that are helping children and adolescents, women's groups, special groups, Catholic schools, and many others, hundreds of others. The Redesca has said that across the board, the economic, social, cultural, and other rights have simply been suspended, have been wiped away. And our rapporteurship for freedom of expression have continually railed against the ever crueler muzzling of the press. Just in the last few weeks, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has learned about the forced exile of newspaper persons and communication workers, among whom there is the displacement and forced exodus of the entire editorial group of the major newspaper La Prensa, which really breaks records even for Nicaragua state. It is the oldest newspaper in the country. And access to news is practically nil because there is such fear by everyone to be considered an enemy of the state. All of this has, of course, been translated into enormous zones of repression and distress. The Catholic network for television has been tackled, community radio, among which 7 that again belong to the Diocese of Metagalva in that country. And we therefore speak high and loud here before the Permanent Council against this visceral attack against the Church, including those who are kept in the Curia in Matagalpa, along with other religious persons who have spoken up and who are being deprived of food and medicine. All of this occurred after the very violent police repression that the population of Ceiba underwent not long ago, the 1st of August, when the community sought to speak against the clampdown on the community radios. And not long later, when the vice president spoke up and leveled her criticism against the bishop and spoke of crimes against religiosity, she called them. This has to end. At the same time, we're hearing about the exceedingly serious and ever more serious condition that on the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua has been visited upon the indigenous and black populations of that place where their ancestors have lived for centuries, which naturally has led to and is in effect forced displacement. There is, of course, also the ongoing clampdown on Nicaraguan citizens coming back, should they have wished to so to do, the withdrawal of passports, arbitrary detention, you name it. The UNHCR has said that the number of refugees and asylum seekers has risen to 150,000 persons in Costa Rica alone. So the Commission speaks out to all the states of this region to join up as one for the principle of shared responsibility and an upholding of the most basic human rights for the persons of Nicaraguan origin. They need protection, they need asylum, and a number of any other protections that can be offered for humanitarian reasons. And to close, I take the liberty to express solidarity and the commitment of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights that will stand with you against this trampling of human rights in Nicaragua. And we will use every one of the conventional and regulatory instruments to see that that message is received. Thank you.
Mr. Alejandro Alvarez, member of the Group of Human Rights Experts on Nicaragua. Mr. Alvarez, welcome to the OAS Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Señor Álvarez, si puede solicitar la palabra, por favor.
Thank you, Madam President. Saludo también a todas las representaciones del Consejo Permanente y a las representaciones observadoras. Como continuación de lo planteado por mi colega,
let me also greet all of the permanent representatives and observers. I would like to begin by speaking of the mandate of Group of Experts, and my colleague will follow through after I have shared my thoughts very briefly on the collaboration that we have set up with interested parties. This is nothing new, particularly in the framework of this terrible crisis that befell Nicaragua in April of 2018. Very quickly after that, all of the necessary representatives of the UN, UNHCR, and others came to the rescue of those persons, and we hoped that we could help in the first days of September of 2018 to have some people leave, and of course the ICHR had to leave at the end of that year. But we worked very closely together, and all of these teams shared sources of information and allowed us jointly and severally to map out a pretty good picture of what was happening. There was an agreement between the ICHR, the OAS, and the government of Nicaragua that sought to identify moments of violence or acts of violence from the beginning of the crisis to May of 2018. There was a report drawn up at the end of 2018. 190 deaths were mentioned, and the context in which those deaths occurred is also spelled out. In the opinion of this group of independent experts, it was held to be the case that these were violations of international human rights and bluntly, crimes against humanity. You will know, as well as we, how critical the work of this Permanent Council is and the high-level commission, both of which have been reporting very pertinent facts on the devolving situation in Nicaragua. All of this is fact-based, and the international community throughout the world has very much valued that information, especially in this hemisphere, but not just, but throughout the world. There is concern. Our mandate then is not occurring in a void. It certainly is rooted in very fertile ground that has been developed over many, many years and through past tragedies. We have already said to the government, and I take this opportunity to share with you, that this cooperation will remain extremely valuable as we seek to move forward and push for truth and justice. We have already been working very, very hard with the civil society in Nicaragua, various defenders, human rights defenders there. But the very objective report that has been drawn up spells out just how critical and difficult the situation has been. And in order to move forward, we're going to have to continue relying on the UN Human Rights Group as well as the high-level groups that have been designated in this council. And it is our judgment, and it's certainly our intent, to continue sharing that information that we will have garnered with the independent groups of experts of the OAS and the ICHR focused on Nicaragua. For us, it was absolutely essential to know that the entire diplomatic muscle of this council was behind us. And we are hopeful, hope springs eternal, that the day will come when we can actually go to Nicaragua and gather the information in situ. Meanwhile, we will continue to work for the resolution of this crisis that has befallen Nicaragua since 2018, and of course within the framework of international human rights as we know them to be and as we uphold them today. Thank you.
Buitrago, member of the Group of Human Rights Experts on Nicaragua. Ms. Buitrago, welcome to the OAS Permanent Council. You have the floor, Madam.
Gracias, Presidenta. Un saludo especial.
Very much, Madam Chairman, and a very special greeting to all of the members of the Permanent Council, the Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, and all guests. From the first to the last of us who have stepped into this important mandate, the last of whom has been Alejandro, is, as it was from the beginning, the knowledge that our raison d'etre is to recognize and to speak against all of the trampled rights. We also hope very much that we will be able personally to assess these things in Nicaragua. That day will come. But meanwhile, we have continually pressed on everyone that we know this won't fall from the sky. We have to push for it. We have gathered the information as the president of the ICHR has just expressed the information that she is aware of and that there is other word. But yet we all know it's not the same as being there oneself. We want to be in touch with the direct victims, with the many indirect victims. We need to understand that in this shared understanding, there isn't just one way to investigate. There are any number of ways to investigate, but alas, time is of the essence, and this began in 2018. So, faced with the enormous issue of responsibility that the president of the group already spoke of, we also recognize that there is a responsibility to establish facts, to ascertain circumstances. But there is a very elementary point also, that is not only as to the various elements and constituents of what constitutes a crime against humanity, but also the trampling of justice in so many respects. This means that we need to work horizontally, knowing what our mandate is, and in the confidence that we must continue doing what we can until such time comes when we can verify and corroborate the facts that we will have been compiling and the picture we will have been building throughout. This mandate also points, we know that, to the importance of a universal system of human rights being A, recognized, and B, implemented. And so we know, we are confident that the members of this Permanent Council will stand with us in order to do just that, gather the facts, and stand with us for a principle of universality as to the sort of violations that are being leveled here. This leads us to a second framework, because there are two tiers really in the mandate that we see we have. I've just described the first, but the second one, aside from the domestic responsibility, there is the international responsibility, which flows from the first one. And so we have been very, very careful to do what we could. We've interviewed some 130, maybe 140 different individuals who have been rich sources of information, but there too, this doesn't just happen, believe me. It takes a very great deal of effort to allow these connections and these interviews to take place. So thank you for sharing all of the very valuable information that you have gathered on your own, and agents that come forward with very precious elements, all of which build a picture. And we all have a place in that effort. So we work impartially, transparently, and as I said earlier, in a manner that will not only allow us to gather the facts, but to be able to analyze them in such a manner that will be a predicate to recommendations to the international community. That is where I'll leave it today. Thank you very much.
Having heard the foregoing presentations, of which this Council has taken due note, we will now proceed with item 3 of our agenda, which is the consideration of the draft resolution titled "The Situation in Nicaragua," presented by the Permanent Missions of Antigua and Barbuda, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, Peru, the United States, and Uruguay, with the co-sponsorship of Brazil, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, contained in document CP/Doc 5798/22. I offer the floor first to the proposing permanent missions for the presentation of the draft resolution. Ambassador Sanders, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I begin by first thanking the speakers from the UN Group of Human Rights Experts on Nicaragua and the President of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights for their informative but deeply troubling presentations on the current situation in Nicaragua. Their reports give cause for great alarm and emphasize the necessity and importance for this Permanent Council to raise its collective voice concerning the worsening situation in a member state of our hemispheric family of nations. I also thank the 9 other delegations that have co-sponsored this resolution with Antigua and Barbuda. They are Brazil, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Peru, the United States of America, and Uruguay. Distinguished colleagues, how have we got to the stage of yet another resolution on Nicaragua? We have not got here by our choosing. We have got here because, regrettably, the actions of the government of Nicaragua against its own people have become increasingly more oppressive and repressive. None of us can sit by in silence while arbitrary detentions persist, resulting in an increasing number of detainees, including women and elderly persons, being held in appalling conditions. civil society organizations, including church bodies and universities, are being stripped of their legal status on spurious and unsubstantiated accusations, simply because the Nicaraguan government is determined to forcibly stifle any semblance of dissent. Journalism has become a crime in all but name. The media is suffering relentless harassment, pushing foreign representatives out of the country and intimidating what is left of the local independent press. Not even the church has been spared in this growing and worrying atmosphere of heightened repression. Many of our delegations have seen the horrifying pictures of Bishop Rolando Alvarez on his knees, begging for mercy, while a group of armed police officers surround him after he was banned from celebrating Mass. These are not events about which responsible governments can turn a blind eye or remain silent. Under our charters, we observe a constraint not to interfere in the internal affairs of a state. But we also have an obligation and a responsibility to speak out for any of our peoples who are subject to cruel and inhumane treatment, which amounts to torture. I remind that Article 7 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights states with absolute clarity that no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. And this right is non-derogable. This means it is a person's core human right, which must be respected and cannot be taken away or suspended for any reason. That charter is binding on us all, including the government of Nicaragua. Colleagues, these are the circumstances that have brought us to consider this resolution today. They are not circumstances of our making. They are circumstances entirely due to the repressive and oppressive actions of the Nicaraguan government. These are the actions of the Nicaraguan government that are causing its own people to flee to neighboring states, placing enormous burdens on them at a time of grave economic difficulty and uncertainty in the world. I remind that for several years now, this Permanent Council has tried strenuously to engage the government of Nicaragua, repeatedly offering the hand of friendship to help restore democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights in accordance with our governing charters. We last did so 8 months ago, on December 8th, 2021, by a resolution in which we authorized the Secretary General to seek a meeting with the Nicaraguan government to convey our offer of a high-level good offices mission. On January 19th this year, the Secretary General reported to this Permanent Council that despite all efforts, the Nicaraguan government would not engage. Nonetheless, we did not close the door. The Secretary General continued through formal and informal channels to renew the offer of this Council, only to receive a stony silence in response. And while we all recognize that the government of Nicaragua has decided to withdraw from the OAS effective November 18th, 2023, it is at this time still a member of this organization, subject to the duties and responsibilities of our charter, including the Nicaraguan people's right to democracy and the obligation of the Nicaraguan government to promote and defend it. The government of Nicaragua may have withdrawn from this family of nations, but the people of Nicaragua have not. And none of the peoples of our member states would countenance our government's silence while they suffer. That, colleagues, is the context of this resolution. A resolution which, even at this moment of heightened oppression and repression in Nicaragua, still renews its offer to engage the Nicaraguan government in restoring democratic institutions and respect for human rights in accordance with international law. We have not shut any doors or burnt any bridges. The candle continues to burn in the window. The pathway to dialogue remains open. But we cannot sit idly by in the face of such evident persecution, harassment, and hounding and deprivation of rights. In this regard, my delegation, on behalf of all the co-sponsors, call on this Permanent Council to show its unequivocal support for this resolution by voting in its favor. I now request a vote on this resolution, Madam Chair, and I ask that even though the rules do not require it, that you give the floor to one of the co-sponsors of this resolution, the Ambassador of Chile, to second my request. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Sanders. As for your request, the floor is offered to the Ambassador of Chile, after which we will proceed to the vote as requested.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the facts and situation is well known, both for the inter-American as well as the worldwide human rights, Chile seconds the proposed resolution. Thank you.
Antigua and Barbuda, and seconded by the delegation of Chile. We shall proceed to a vote to determine whether delegations do or do not approve of the draft resolution being considered by the Permanent Council. The Chair wishes to remind delegations that once the voting has begun, no representative may interrupt it, except for a point of order relating to the way it is being conducted. In accordance with Article 57, the decisions of the Permanent Council shall be taken by the vote of an absolute majority of its members. The Chair also reminds that under Article 58, voting will be done by roll call, and the vote of the representative shall be cast in favor, in opposition, or in abstention. We will now vote beginning with the delegation of Peru, and the question is, do you approve the draft resolution under consideration?
El Perú vota a favor.
Peru votes in favor.
Dominican Republic?
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Dominican Republic votes to approve.
St. Kitts and Nevis?
Fernando, ¿está conectado San Kitts y Nevis? Yes.
St. Kitts and Nevis votes in favor.
Thank you, St. Kitts and Nevis. St. Lucia.
Thank you, Chair. St. Lucia votes in favor.
Thank you, St. Lucia. St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
St. Vincent and the Grenadines votes no.
Thank you, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Suriname.
Suriname votes in favor.
The Bahamas.
Thank you, Chair. The Bahamas votes in favor.
Trinidad and Tobago.
Good afternoon, Chair, and thank you. Trinidad and Tobago votes in favor.
Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago. Uruguay, how do you vote?
Uruguay votes in favor.
How do you vote?
Venezuela vota a favor, Presidente.
Votes in favor.
Antigua and Barbuda votes in favor, Chair.
Thank you. Argentina, how do you vote?
Argentina votes in favor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Fernando, ¿tenemos a Barbados conectado?
Is Barbados connected, Fernando? Yeah.
Barbados, can you kindly request the floor to issue your vote?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Barbados votes in favor.
Thank you, Barbados. Belize, how do you vote?
Belize votes in favor.
Thank you, Belize. Bolivia, how do you vote?
Very good afternoon. Bolivia votes in absentia. Afternoon. Brazil votes in favor.
Votes in favor.
Thank you, Canada. Chile, how do you vote?
Gracias, Presidenta. Chile vota.
Chair, Chile votes in favor. Colombia, how do you vote? Is someone from Colombia connected? No, Mr. Ambassador, no one is.
You vote?
Buenas tardes, señor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Costa Rica votes in favor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Commonwealth of Dominica votes in favor.
Thank you, Dominica. Ecuador, how do you vote?
Thank you. Ecuador votes in favor. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Abstención, Presidente.
In absentia, Madam Chair.
The United States votes in favor.
Thank you, United States. Grenada, how do you vote?
Grenada votes in favor, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Grenada. Guatemala, how do you vote?
Guatemala votes.
Guatemala votes in favor.
Favor.
Thank you, Guyana. Haiti, how do you vote?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Haiti vote en favor.
Haiti votes in favor.
Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honduras will abstain. Abstention.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jamaica votes in favor.
Thank you, Jamaica. Mexico, how do you vote?
México vota en abstención.
Mexico votes to abstain. In absentia. In abstention.
Panama, how do you vote?
Panama votes in favor.
How do you vote?
Paraguay vota.
Paraguay votes in favor.
If you would allow us a few minutes to tally the votes, please. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have the results of the voting. Voting in favor of the resolution, 27. Voting against, 1 delegation. There were 4 abstentions and 2 delegations are absent. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary General. With a vote of 27 in favor, 1 in opposition, 4 abstentions, and 2 absences, the Permanent Council hereby declares the draft resolution, The Situation in Nicaragua, approved. Approved. Are there any requests for the floor? There being no, okay. I now offer the floor to the delegation of Canada.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, and colleagues. Good afternoon. Let me start by thanking the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda, and especially its permanent representative, Sir Ronald Sanders, for their leadership on this resolution, which shines a light on the unacceptable increase in arbitrary detentions and the closure of civil society organizations in Nicaragua, amongst other concerning developments. And let me also thank the President of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the members of the UN group of experts who spoke so eloquently this afternoon to us, illustrating the issues that I think are rightly alarming members of the international community about the ongoing violations of human rights, which have been documented not only in the presentations today, but in UN and OAS reports. At least 180 political prisoners continue to languish in prison in Nicaragua. As the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said just a few weeks ago, and I'll quote, relatives have reported their loved ones are being held in inhumane conditions. Particular concern for those in need of urgent, permanent, or specialized medical care, which authorities reportedly refuse to provide. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has continued to call on the regime to guarantee political prisoners have regular contact with their families. That's something the president of the IACHR mentioned this afternoon. In light of the worrisome conditions under which those prisoners are held, especially women. In May, just a couple of months ago, the Commission stressed concerns about the 14 women in detention who are being subjected to isolation regimes and held incommunicado. The health and lives of these women are at risk for lack of access to sufficient food, lack of access to drinking waters, and specialist medical care considering their gender and age. And we join with others calling upon measures to be taken to ensure that the rights of all men and women deprived of liberty are respected. It's come up this afternoon on a couple of occasions, the situation of journalists. As Sir Ronald said, journalism has become a crime in all but name in that country. Nicaragua has one of the worst records in the world on media freedom. The 2022 World Press Freedom Index, published by Reporters Without Borders, lists Nicaragua very close to the bottom, 160 in its list of 180 countries. The commissions, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression just 3 weeks ago said there's currently no guarantee whatsoever to exercise the right to freedom of expression in Nicaragua. The human rights situation is alarming. Also alarming, the increasing number of people who've been forced to flee Nicaragua to neighboring states because of political persecution or because of the deteriorating socioeconomic situation. And I want to read another quote here, this time from March, from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, who said, more Nicaraguans are currently seeking protection in Costa Rica than all the refugees and asylum seekers combined during Central America's civil wars in the 1980s, when Costa Rica was a sanctuary for those fleeing violence. Let me just read that a second time, because I suspect you're as struck by this as I was when I read it. More Nicaraguans are currently seeking protection in Costa Rica than all of the refugees and asylum seekers combined during Central America's civil wars in the 1980s. As President Mantilla said, the migration crisis resulting from the Ortega regime's persecution needs international attention. Neighboring countries and host communities cannot be left alone in welcoming and providing services to Nicaraguans in exile. Madam Chair, let me conclude with a few words in French. Nous rappelons également au régime Ortega que la décision de relancer la charte de l'OEA.
Ortega's regime decision to withdraw from the charter, Nicaragua continues linked indissolubly due to its obligations until November 2023, included the obligation to respect the rights of persons. We must hold accountable the government of Daniel Ortega for its actions, including the continued violations against the rights of persons and of human rights violations in Nicaragua, and demand the immediate release of all political prisoners. Canada continues in its commitment to support Nicaragua and to reintegrate, to have Nicaragua rejoin the community of nations that respects all persons and the rule of law.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, permanent representatives, alternate representatives, permanent observers, Chiefs of Staff Conke and Prince, secretaries, other members of staff of the OAS General Secretariat, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Madam Chair, the delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines takes the floor to indicate the position of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in relation to the draft resolution, the situation in Nicaragua. Madam Chair, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has abstained on 3 prior resolutions regarding the situation in Nicaragua, and our delegation has always called for dialogue, respect for sovereignty, the non-intervention in the internal affairs of states, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. Madam Chair, our position of adherence to the principles above has not changed, as we reiterate the call for dialogue as a means of resolving conflict. Madam Chair, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has voted no today on the resolution in furtherance of its insistence that the appropriate channels for engaging in dialogue with the subject state be sought. Madam Chair, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for its part, continues to engage the Nicaraguan authorities in dialogue leading to the settlement of the issues. I thank you.
Thank you, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I now offer the floor to Ecuador.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
I thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask that Ecuador be listed as a co-sponsor of this draft resolution now adopted, not only because of the intrinsic principles upon which this is based, but because in the convocation to this meeting, what is laid forth with particular clarity is the grounds on which this resolution is predicated as it has been put for us, and above and beyond the pronouncements of others, whomsoever. We simply cannot ignore what is happening, nor can we turn a blind eye while the situation in Nicaragua goes from bad to worse. These values are values we presumably all cherish, and they have been trampled in that Central American country. A respect for human rights is an essential core of my president. And what we see in this draft resolution now approved is not only an upholding of the instruments on which this very organization, American States, is based, but also the Roldoso doctrine, which states that a respect for human rights is a predicate for the behavior of states among themselves. There is, therefore, an international obligation to uphold them in extenso. It's not a question of picking or choosing. And one cannot go the route of violating non-intervention. Not the same thing. A respect for fundamental freedoms and human rights is the very basis on which healthy community relations can be upheld. And we stand for the principles that are enshrined in the charter of this organization, American States. We cannot remain silent. We cannot turn, I say again, a blind eye or an indolence while basic human rights are trampled. We have an obligation to speak out and to denounce these crimes against humanity. Not to do so would be to defraud the peoples of all of our nations, and I deeply believe would very, very genuinely lead to their opprobrium and severe disappointment. Every action of the Ortega Murillo regime, every single one that tramples the rights of its citizens, cries out to be held for what they are, complete opposition to basic democracy. This organization, through its Secretary General, has approached that regime numerous times. We have done everything we could to reach out and to establish dialogues, but every one of their actions continue to violate the Inter-American Charter. People held without the minimum medical attention. No food, no water, no doctor. What is this? We call out for a release of those who have been arbitrarily detained. They must be offered basic justice, to come before a judge. And many have called for, and I join with them, the immediate release of political prisoners and a cessation to the ongoing harassment of the church, of other community regimes. And we stand with those who call out to the Ortega Murillo machine to finally restore democracy. And we ask that they look to the basic charter of this organization.
Colleagues, group of experts, Guyana was again filled with deep regret as it voted in favor of this resolution and the preceding similar ones. Regret because Guyana in the 1980s was heartened by the Ortega-led struggle against the dictator Somoza. Regrettably, the reports out of Nicaragua today sound very much like they did in the 1980s. Only that today, Ortega and his regime are the dictators, persecuting the church and many citizens who supported them in those days. The situation in Nicaragua should not have been such as to warrant a resolution of this nature from the Permanent Council. Guyana regrets, but is nonetheless constrained by the troubling realities on the ground, as reported by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and as documented by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights Special Monitoring Mechanism for Nicaragua and the Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression of the said Commission. The restrictions on human rights and fundamental freedoms and the plight of Nicaraguans occasioned by these untoward developments are understandably a matter of concern to us all and to this Permanent Council. We appeal to the leaders of our brotherly Republic of Nicaragua to uphold the tenets of democracy as per the Inter-American Democratic Charter and the Charter of the OAS itself, and to allow an open process of engagement and dialogue at the national level with the assistance and support of regional interlocutors, old friends, and many who stand ready, amongst which this Permanent Council is positioned to play a facilitative role, and it is Guyana's hope that the government of Nicaragua would consider the Council's offer to engage. I thank you.
Thank you, Guyana. I now offer the floor to the Dominican Republic.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, for convening this meeting, to which the President of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and other experts have graced us with their presence and illuminated our understanding of the situation with our vote. We seek to speak out against the grave violations against democracy in Nicaragua. And that is why, with this esteemed group of fellow member states, we have been honored to support the draft resolution, which we have now indeed adopted over the last few weeks. The grave accusations of against the violations of the rights of the citizens that we have heard from various press groups have come even worse. It has been a long time that we have been speaking out against recognized leaders, men and women of the community, be they defenders of human rights or entrepreneurial groups or members of the independent press. Things have gone literally from bad to worse, and many of the persons who had been hauled before, in fact, not a judge, but thrown into jail, have not had the opportunity to meet with lawyers or very, very limited terms, and the lack of minimum guarantees is yet one among other instances of the arbitrary holdings of this regime, none of which in any of its action comports with the basic rules of international law. The closing of democratic circles and spaces is ever more asphyxiating. We are gravely concerned by the suspension of liberties of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. They're all of them scotched. And the workers, certainly in the independent press, have been particularly targeted, and more than 100 newspaper persons have been exiled, and many of their publications closed down. The particular persecution of the Catholic Church and its members cannot be ignored. The closing down of the Virgin of Fatima group and a number of different Catholic groups, the action against Monsignor Alvarez and others who have not been able to meet and whose very doors have been violated are shocking. And yet Monsignor Alvarez had the courage to speak out in front of his persecutors, to think of good and to work for the good and not for evil, to turn the other cheek. We have heard that before, and that witnessing of his deep vocation should speak to us all. And whatever we may feel at the religious level, we can see he's a pacifist, and we can see he is brave. Dear friends, the gravity that we discuss here is disconcerting. The extraordinary violation of human rights, documented time and again, can hardly be explained away. It calls for justice. It calls for non-repetition. And frankly, things aren't looking good. Everything seems to indicate that this will continue, having demolished the political opposition, the press, the universities. Certainly, the next victims will be anybody in society with the most minimal conscience. Nobody can say boo. Nobody can think out loud and hardly dare think in petto for fear of being persecuted and thrown into jail. Simply to have the courage to speak out. And we need to stand for the personal integrity and the rights of these people. We must continue to push for an internal dialogue that will lead to broad participation by all. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of Paraguay is very, very grateful for your having called this special meeting of the Permanent Council to discuss the shortage situation in Nicaragua and the presence of the President of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and United Nations Human Rights Specialists. Thank you for your respective statements. We appreciate this opportunity to speak out as we are doing at this highest level of our organization to Nicaragua to speak against the persecution of independent press and the trampling of the right of freedom of expression. We deeply regret the arbitrary detention of anyone who has dared speak up and stand up for their rights, including religious organizations and so many other civil society representatives. So we would call on this Permanent Council to continue working to try to engage with the regime in that country for the restoration of basic human rights. Madam Chair, we know that there have been extraordinarily famous authors, Palais de la Selva, Rubén Darío, to name that famous poet. So many brilliant lights have been Nicaraguan, part of universal literature and philosophy. And so we can only hope that the freedom of expression, the freedom of thought, the freedom of the press, all of those freedoms that we hold dear will yet again flourish in Nicaragua. We can only hope. Meanwhile, we're going to keep in this Inter-American space, keep insisting that that be the case. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. What more could possibly be said about how much the Nicaraguan situation is grievous to all of us? How much more suffering do you think we could put up with? Well, maybe a little more. How much more barbarity? How are we going to weigh that? You tell me. We're witnessing this. What are we going to do about it? What do we all think needs to happen for there to be a change in Nicaragua? Meanwhile, what is of concern to us, I deeply believe, is the question of commitment. Our commitment to democratic principles, to human rights, to the basic planks of democracy. What we're doing is good, but we need to do it with a great deal more intensity, perhaps. We are pacifists. Our arms are our words. That is our weapon. That is the means by which we stand as militants, as crusaders, I don't dare from saying. This is a small space of the international community where we know that an immense majority of countries are speaking out for the defense of human rights for the citizens in Nicaragua. What are we calling for? We're calling for the Ortega-Trujillo couple have the most basic respect for society. I I can only thank Sir Ronald Sanders for this beautiful text. We know how much he invested himself in it. And when one has a colleague like Sir Ronald Sanders of that caliber, it's easy to stand up and to stand tall, and certainly to stand with him. Together with Gioconda Belli, a famous author, I learned a lot. We spoke of the tyranny, of the terror that poor country is undergoing. And I have to say that I was deeply moved by her. Gioconda is really an example to all of us, I believe. And she has a beautiful essay about patience for resistance. The governmental palaces are abuzz, not only with that of the resident insects, but of those who are working right and left to impose their will. But the most effective armies are the armies of butterflies and dragonflies. It's hard to stop those tunnels that are furrows in the ground, right under the boots of their tyrannies. And just like the work of termites, so too will the tyranny. That's how her essay ends. And what I can say is that one day peace will prevail, and people in the street, people will rise again, and the day will dawn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our fellow delegations for convening today's timely special session of the Permanent Council. Madam Chair, I also want to thank the expert speakers from the group of human rights experts on Nicaragua, as well as the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights for their observations on the worsening state of political and civil rights in Nicaragua. We greatly value their contributions to our discussion here today. Let me begin by stressing that instead of fulfilling past commitments to release its political prisoners unconditionally, the Ortega Murillo regime continues to threaten, harass, and detain even more of its citizens. The United States, joined by many governments represented here today, has spoken out repeatedly on the ongoing threats to human rights organizations that seek to document incidents and provide legal representation to political prisoners. Madam Chair, we have also condemned the ongoing harassment and surveillance of human rights defenders and former political prisoners and their families who continue bravely to call for democratic transition in Nicaragua. However, the Ortega Murillo regime continues to show where its priorities lie, silencing civil society, human rights defenders, educational and religious institutions, and organizations which benefit the community and the people of Nicaragua. Let me be clear, the United States supports the people of Nicaragua seeking peaceful democratic change in their country with all diplomatic and economic tools at our disposal. The United States condemns the sentencing of political prisoners and ongoing repression of universities, journalists, and civil society, including human rights defenders and religious actors. President Ortega and Vice President Murillo continue to demonstrate their aim of entrenching their families' authoritarian control over every aspect of life in Nicaragua. Targeted harassment and repression of Catholic leaders during the last 2 weeks is is but the latest example. We have seen the brutal treatment of those unjustly detained who only sought peaceful change through free and fair elections. These political prisoners have done nothing wrong. However, this regime, terrified of losing power, has tightened its grip and punished political opposition, independent media, students, business leaders, educators, religious actors, and civil society. And we have heard yet again today of abuses against political prisoners, which includes excessive confinement, continuous interrogations, denial of medical care and access to reading materials, including sacred texts, inadequate food, and sleep deprivation. These abuses are egregious and unconscionable for all, but especially for the many older or ill prisoners. We are also concerned that Nicaragua continues its negative trend on religious freedom, including escalating threats against Catholic clergy, a topic recently addressed in our Committee on Juridical and Political Affairs last week. And as President Biden has noted, members of the Nicaraguan National Police, along with violent mobs of pro-government supporters, also controlled by government actors, have attacked religious institutions in retaliation for their support for political and religious leaders. Indeed, Ortega and Murillo have labeled priests and bishops terrorists and coup plotters, accused them of committing crimes, and threatened them with prosecution on trumped-up accusations of inciting hatred against pro-government supporters. A week ago, Vice President Murillo accused Catholic clergy of committing, quote-unquote, crimes against spirituality. It is absolutely absurd. We continue to believe that the OAS is the organization most firmly committed to the defense of democracy in the Western Hemisphere and must support the democratic aspirations of the Nicaraguan people. With this in mind, we thank Canada and Chile and the leadership of the delegation of Antigua and Barbuda for championing efforts to develop today's Permanent Council resolution, which addresses these concerns. Madam Chair, this is why we also urge collective support to approve a strong OAS General Assembly resolution on Nicaragua. To this end, the United States looks forward to working collaboratively with all of you on efforts in Lima to hold the Nicaraguan government accountable for its abuses. This merits ongoing attention here in this Council and also at the upcoming General Assembly. At the same time, we must continue to work with partners at the UN and EU to increase international pressure that will result in the transition to democratic government and respect for human rights the Nicaraguan people deserve. Today is a key step in this effort, Madam Chair, and we thank all the members of the OAS Working Group on Nicaragua for their commitment and engagement. I reaffirm the U.S. commitment to work in partnership to secure a strong and broadly supported text in October. Thank you very much.
Thank you, United States. I now offer the floor to Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Buenas tardes a todas las delegaciones. Agradecemos la presentación de la presidenta de la Comisión Interamericana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We thank the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the group of experts on Nicaragua. Costa Rica reiterates its concern for the deterioration of the human rights situation in Nicaragua. We cannot be indifferent nor ignore the conditions that Nicaraguans face day by day. I would like to refer particularly to the situation of the more than 180 political prisoners who lack even the most minimal guarantees and conditions, according to human rights organizations and their own family members. We call urgently for the liberation, for the immediate freeing of these political prisoners, as well as an end to political persecution and intimidation against the press, and to guarantees of the freedom of expression, along the lines of what we have approved in the draft resolution today in this Permanent Council. Costa Rica once again calls on Nicaragua to engage in an opportune, international, open, and effective dialogue that would respond to the immediate needs of the Nicaraguan people, and that would, in this way, ensure the full respect for human rights, respect for institutions, and the consolidation of representative democracy in that country. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
After expressing my thanks for the presentations by the panelists that have joined us today, allow me to read a brief quote of an interview with Daniela Sanchez. Daniela says that solidarity is expressed by all of the world. We heard some of this. That is, we heard about some of this, and we know we are not alone. Given this situation, I think that even though we are in an island, we know that there are others engaged with us, and this comforts our soul. I close quotes. This phrase, distinguished colleagues, is not from Nicaragua. It's from Chile. And it is not only the political prison. It is from the political prisoners under Augusto Pinochet. We know that even though you may be isolated or locked up, you are not alone, because the solidarity expressed from throughout the world changes things. And the question then is changed. If we face the question of discussing a given resolution, will this cease the harassment of international civil society, international organizations or civil society organizations? A resolution on its own will not solve such problems, much less in our context when, unfortunately, all too frequently, there are not opportunities for the organizations of the hemisphere to come to an agreement. But the question that faces us today is not this one. It is different. The question is, what can we do here under these conditions and in this forum to contribute somehow to the resistance of a people that faces situations very similar to those faced by our people so many years ago? And that's why I thought that this quote from the Museum of Memory of Chile was so appropriate. And faced with this question of what we must do, from the perspective of the history of Chile, the answer is clear. There's no silver bullet, no magic solution to restore human rights in Nicaragua, and it would be absurd to consider that this resolution will do so. As there is no silver bullet, what is our obligation is to look for all real, multilateral, bilateral, international solutions to add our effort, our small grain of sand, to the effort of having heard the role of international solidarity in facing up to the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. The prisoners of that regime, of Pinochet's regime, did not feel alone. And we must modestly look for all means available to us to support the cause of human rights in Nicaragua. And that's why we support the draft resolution supported by the countries that have been already mentioned. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, Brazil remembers that and reminds Nicaragua that it continues to be subject to all of the obligations and duties of a member of the Organization of American States. Brazil continues to accompany the situation of human rights in Nicaragua that continually suffers arbitrary detentions and violent episodes against its own people. The Permanent Council must continue attentive to the unfolding of this situation, and I would note with great concern the closure of 7 broadcasters, attacks on the Catholic Church, and others. The Brazilian government repudiates the violent actions taken against religious Catholic leaders and urges a restoration of freedom of the press and the right to broadcast of the 7 closed media companies. Brazil has approved all of the resolutions by this permanent council to address the situation in Nicaragua in an effort to exhort the country to comply with its obligations as a result of the obligations under the Inter-American Charter, Democratic Charter, and the Inter-American Human Rights System. Brazil is gravely concerned with the abuses of the rights of all persons, particularly women, and beyond this, Brazil condemns the attacks on the freedom of expression and the attacks on civil society organizations whose in the legitimate expression of their own views or their own political representation as a result of elections. We call on the Secretary General's good offices to find opportunities for dialogue for the restoration of democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law in Nicaragua. Thank you very much.
To Mr. Gustavo Tare.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our greetings to the Chair of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and the other experts for giving us valuable information on the situation facing Nicaragua, as well as the sponsor member states of this resolution. Assassination, detention, arbitrary detentions in unhuman conditions, forced closure of NGOs that work to protect and defend human rights, illegal attacks on the political opposition offices, and attacks on bishops and priests, attacks on the freedom of expression and on the free press. All of this is addressed in the resolution that we have just approved. For those who would consider that this is of a political narration intended to offend the Nicaraguan government, I think it is worthwhile to remember what the Inter-American Court of Human Rights have said, what the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, and the High Commissioner for Human Rights of that same United Nations, as is expressed in the whereas clauses of the resolution that has just been approved, and the expressions of the distinguished panelists that we have just heard from, and a majority of representatives present here. The response of the Ortega regime has been to decry and to oppose the democratic charter and to oppose elections at all costs, as was done by the dictatorship in Venezuela. The Permanent Council is a body that you may or may not be in agreement with. You may disagree, but these are not political opinions. These are facts that have been investigated, documented, and confirmed. And faced with these facts, the only thing that you could do was to demonstrate that they are false. That has not happened. We must recognize the existence of violations of human rights, but the attitude of resisting a denunciation of the human rights violations because of considering this an intrusion or an intervention in another country's affairs violates the spirit of the Democratic Charter. Our organization has a duty to denounce human rights violations and to do so under all conditions and in any circumstance. I would invite the representatives here to change the word Nicaragua for the word Venezuela, and we'll see that this resolution, with very minimal changes, could be approved in the same way against my own country. Violations of human rights in my country have been addressed and denounced by the very same organizations that I've just cited. History has shown that it is irrelevant what is the government that violates human rights. These must be denounced without any political or ideological conditions. As Nelson Mandela has said, to deprive a person of human rights is to put their own humanity in question. Humanity is but one, and this is applicable to all circumstances and to all countries. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico has voted in abstention today as it considers that the OAS is not the appropriate space for dialogue with a member state that has broken all relationships. The insistence of approving resolutions that express because as a way of establishing a dialogue of trust and openness with that government is not the right way. It is evident that for a member state, the Secretary General is not a trustworthy interlocutor, as he is engaged in shameful actions and often does not reflect the spirit of the democratic charter of the OAS. The approval of resolutions of the Permanent Council, which a priori would not give positive results, is a great simulation. We must accept that there is no point to adopting resolutions of this sort. This is to lead the organization into a road that leads us nowhere. The OAS must be built as a multilateral forum capable of understanding the complex situations in our hemisphere. One of these is the questionable behavior that the organization has had since 2019. And it is imperative that we reorient the organization to meet the correct goals. We hope the changes in the political map of our region will allow us to regain a respectable role in this process to accomplish the goals that our member states have affirmed in this organization. And this is the compass that must orient our decisions. Madam Chair, Mexico has worked constructively and does work constructively within the framework of the human rights system of the United Nations as the multilateral space for the promotion and protection of human rights. For this reason, Mexico supported the resolution 49/3 of that council on the protection of human rights in Nicaragua, which established the group of experts, the human rights experts on Nicaragua, whose presentation we have taken note of here as presented by Julissa Mantilla, the president of the Human Rights Commission. Mexico continues to be committed to the protection of human rights and democracy, respect for sovereignty of member states, non-intervention in the internal affairs, and the self-determination of our member states and countries. These principles, which have guided our foreign affairs, must also be principles that are respected in our organization here. To not do so in the OAS is to ignore the history of our region and to be blind to the incapacity of our organization as a way of finding solutions to the challenges faced by member states in our region. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of the Holy See takes note of this extraordinary session of the Permanent Council on the situation in Nicaragua, in which the resolution on the situation in Nicaragua has been approved. This resolution refers to persons and institutions of the Catholic Church, as well as other political and social actors that are affected by the events occurring in that country. The Holy See may not fail to mention its effort and its desire to continue collaborating with those who favor dialogue as a necessary guarantor of democracy and more fraternal relationships. In this regard, the Holy See calls on the parties to find a way to a common understanding based on mutual and reciprocal trust with a view to securing peace and well-being for all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Antigua and Barbuda, you have the floor, sir. The United Kingdom, you have the floor, please, permanent observer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, permanent representatives and fellow permanent observers. The UK thanks Antigua and Barbuda, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, Peru, the United States and Uruguay for the resolution, bringing to the attention of the Permanent Council once again the tragic situation in Nicaragua that is extracting such a grave cost from the people and society of that country. The UK respectfully requests that it be associated as an observer with this resolution. The UK has been consistently clear in its condemnation of the Nicaraguan authorities' lack of respect for democracy and the universal human rights of all Nicaraguans. The unjustified arbitrary detentions and imprisonment of those who seek to challenge the Nicaraguan authorities are an unacceptable assault on their political rights, and the terms of their incarceration are a violation of their right not to be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. The UK continues to call for the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners and the full restoration of all of their civil and political rights. The forced closure of non-governmental organisations is not only unacceptable, but it takes away vital elements of support for vulnerable Nicaraguans. The intimidation of elements of the media stifles freedom of expression so vital for a healthy, functional society. The oppression of members of the Catholic Church in Nicaragua is utterly dismaying. Freedom of religion or belief is a guaranteed universal human right and must be protected, not persecuted. The UK fully commends this resolution's call to the Nicaraguan government to engage with the Permanent Council in support of adherence to the governing charters of the OAS, the restoration of democratic institutions, and respect for human rights in Nicaragua in accordance with international law. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I now offer the floor to the Secretary General.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Agradecemos al representante permanente.
We thank the permanent representative of Antigua and Barbuda, Mr. Sanders, for convening this extraordinary session, as well as to add our voice to the recognition of the acknowledgement of the approval of this resolution addressing the grave situation in Nicaragua. Gentlemen, ladies, dear friends, the regime continues to violate human rights, to incarcerate political prisoners, to attack representatives of the church, to massively close offices of international organizations and NGOs. This organization and the Secretary General's office, based on the work done in 2019, the freeing up of 120 political prisoners, of opening opportunities for dialogue prior to and even during 2019, having worked on the reform of the electoral process, gives us the authority to say that we regret the political use or the political arguments used to disregard the attacks on political opposition, human rights violations, and the denunciation of human rights violation in our neighbor country have been frequent. We have issued resolutions. We have created special commissions, working groups. And this resolution is absolutely important because it means that our organization is not quiet, is not silent. It has the ability to condemn violations of human rights in our hemisphere and violations of human rights and democratic principles. It is frequent that we denounce violations of human rights, the arbitrary detentions in Nicaragua, but this does not mean that we must remain silent. The fact that there are tortures occurring in jails and arbitrary jailings, this again is happening with the case of the Matagalpa bishop, who has said that he is under house arrest without understanding the real reasons. We add our voice to that of Monsignor Alvarez, who says that fear paralyzes us because death is a death of the heart. We respond to hate with love, to hope, with living hope, and fear with strength and courage. 6 broadcasting and media organizations of the diocese, we understand that 1,380 NGOs have been closed down by the regime. Many of these NGOs did an indispensable role in protecting the most marginalized and vulnerable in the population of Nicaragua, as well as others affected by extreme poverty. Indigenous communities today suffer attacks of this regime. Indigenous farm workers are attacked, and we must condemn this as well. Fundamentally, during this week, we also denounce the closure of NGOs and attacks on religious organizations. But we give the government of Nicaragua the opportunity to respond to this resolution and to take all the measures necessary to return to the regular operation of its institutions for the freeing of all political prisoners. The Organization of American States, as the principal political forum of the hemisphere, once again raises its voice against authoritarianism. We need solutions, obviously, for the migration crisis that is underway. We also need dialogue, a dialogue that would, again, show a commitment to democracy. We know we need a dialogue that would allow for freeing of political prisoners, a dialogue that would reestablish the relationships of the international community with this regime, that would make it possible for human rights to be respected in Nicaragua, to stop the war against democracy and human rights that is underway in Nicaragua.
You have the floor, Sir Ron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I take the floor to thank all the delegations that have supported this resolution today. In particular, I wish to thank my colleague from the delegation of Ecuador for joining the other 10 delegations that originally supported this resolution. The fact that the overwhelming majority of delegations, 27 of them, supported this resolution sends a very strong and clear message to the Nicaraguan government, which we sincerely hope they have heard. And in hearing what we have had to say, we hope that they will at last accept our offer to receive a high-level mission to engage them in ways in which democracy and human rights can be restored in that very distressed country. Particularly, we hope that they have heard our call for the release of the prisoners now detained, and to stop the harassment and intimidation of the media, the church, and civil society. They are consuming their country in an atmosphere of fear and intimidation, for which its development will suffer for many generations to come, unless they act to stop it now. Madam Chair, we have stood up for right and justice today, and we have shown the constructive capacity of the Organization of American States. And if we do not believe it has that capacity, then we, the member states of this organization, have it within us the power to make sure it does. But to stand on the sidelines and simply say it does not have the capacity cannot be good enough. We did not become members of this organization because it is an empty drum. We became members of this organization to beat the rhythms that will uphold the pillars on which we say we are dedicated, and that we must continue to do. Madam Chair, I give notice that a group of us will request that the situation in Nicaragua be placed on the agenda of the General Conference in October. And we will do that shortly. We hope by that time the Nicaraguan government will have taken positive action to free the political detainees and to end the atmosphere of fear that now permeates that country. Madam Chair, colleagues, I believe that we all did the right thing today. We stood up for human rights. We stood up for people who are part of our family. We have shown that this organization means something. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Ron. There being no further requests for the floor, we have concluded the order of business for this special meeting. Today's comments will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. I thank you all for your participation. This meeting is adjourned.